think that just about everybody who's here traveled to be here. So I'd like to go around the room and say where everybody kind of came in from and how long your journey was to get here. You want to start, Peter?
I live in Vienna, and my journey was about 12 hours of flight plus a bit of connecting time.
I'm from Pensacola, Florida. It's about 5 hours due south.
For myself, this is the first Bitcoin conference I didn't need to travel to. I live in Atlanta.
I drove in from St. Augustine, Florida. It's about 6 hours.
Took a 2-hour flight from Reagan National Airport in D.C.
Same, but I'm from Alabama, so it's great to be back in the South for a weekend.
And then we had like a 4-hour flight and then about an hour or so of frantically running around the airport trying to find a way to pay our way out of the airport on Bitcoin.
So it had a little time, but not much.
And then a lot of walking as well to get here.
So I wanted to ask you about that. You guys have had a very interesting journey, and I think that a lot of people really look at your project as like a milestone. You know, just like I think that the reporter for Forbes who tried to do the same thing in San Francisco, the idea of living on Bitcoin is on the one hand one of those things where it seems like if we can achieve this, then it's a huge step forward. But on the other hand, it seems like we're really early in the process to do it. Why was this the time that you chose to embark on this?
Oh, I absolutely think that this was the time to do it. If we had tried to do this a year ago, I don't think it would have been possible.
I think Jeffrey Tucker said you'd be dead in a ditch.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
We're resourceful folks, but if the resources simply don't exist, it doesn't matter. If there's nothing to use, how can you get by? And right now, the resources are still scant, but growing rapidly. We saw a lot of interest in Bitcoin last spring when there was the rally up to $250-ish. And we've seen mainstream interest in the subject continue to grow. It's more and more every day outside of the Bitcoin press and more in the mainstream press in a way where we're getting comment on it from high-level executives and government regulators. People who otherwise would not be interested in this weird niche thing, but because it's growing so rapidly, suddenly people are taking an interest in it. And people should be taking an interest in it. The architecture of it is such that it's going to, I think we all agree in this room, that Bitcoin has a bright future ahead of it. There's a middle ground between there not being any really any resources at all and it being way too easy. If we'd done this a year from now, I don't think anybody would have thought anything of it. If we'd done it a year from now, people would say, well, that's
I think that's a great point. And I'll just come out and say I was a skeptic of what you guys are doing to start with. And it's just because there are so many Bitcoin everybody's got an idea, and so you have to kind of sit back and see how people prove yourselves. And over time, you guys have definitely proved yourself to me. What you've done, I think, is just a huge service is people that have been in the Bitcoin space for a while, we tend to think like, oh, we're already here. Like, look, everything's still it's great, man. You do whatever. And you guys are like, no, you see all these gaping holes that are still here. I think that's awesome because people are like, oh, dude, there's totally a niche I can go fill. I can totally do this. Like right now, if I would be like, you know what, we got to get a major petroleum producer online with like that. That's the hookup right now. So we need to get a major gas station that'll take Bitcoin and make it where you can travel ubiquitously around America with Bitcoin. I think someone needs to be on that right now.
And the holes in the Bitcoin system reveal the holes in our system. So your point about all these gas stations being owned by the same company, that's a problem in society, not just with Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Same goes for cell phone services. There are like 4 providers, and if they don't take Bitcoin, what do you do?
Yeah, well, and I think that was really cool because Charlie was like, we're rebooting Bitcoin Wireless, right? And we've got all these providers online. And not only are you going to be able to have cell phone service, you're going to get cell phone service at a discount if you pay in Bitcoin. I was like, yeah, that's exactly what
I think a far-reaching implication of a major brand gas station and a major petroleum company to start accepting Bitcoin would be, well, obviously others would follow. And long term, it could possibly mean that petroleum sales are dictated in Bitcoin.
And so, if you want to just talk about that one thing, we're talking about saving just tons of money from a corporate standpoint, is that fleet management is just a nightmare. It's like making sure that your trucker has access to a debit card, your credit card, so that they can continue to keep rolling. Like just being able to ubiquitously fund a wallet from wherever. You could just make a phone call and they could just fund it and pay per transaction. I think that would streamline that process so much. And that there's a lot of savings there because there's a lot of overhead and credit card transactions stuff, sort of the stuff that we all know about the Bitcoin business. But I think in that specific market, there's a huge value for it.
I love the point about credit cards aren't designed for the internet.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting point that came up a couple of times at this conference was this idea, that diner's card from the 1950s that was, like the prototypical, what then has become the technology that we use to pay for everything on the internet. It's a very interesting point. Peter, you've been traveling around to lots of different conferences over the last couple of months. What's the vibe outside of Atlanta? What's the, are these different? Are you having the same conversations at every one, or are there different perspectives?
I think it might sound surprising, but I think actually in the US it's probably the most one of the most developed and widely dispersed network of Bitcoin businesses and ideas, even though the regulatory environment here is probably the worst in the whole world. I'm not sure what that means, but it's not just like because it might be potentially easier in other countries to do that. Maybe even in other countries there are less problems with getting a bank account and having a debit card or something.
We're currency cowboys.
I think that, in the United States, even though it's a heavy regulatory environment, I think we have sort of a startup's tradition of bucking a regulatory system. And if you look at something like Airbnb or Uber, places that went in, they fixed a problem, technically they were illegal, that they should have got it, but they sat there and they showed value in a system so much that the regulatory environment is already there. The regulation had to morph to let them in because people were like, I want to be able to rent out my spare room. I don't want to have to go through all this crap. And I think that there's a lot of room for Bitcoin to do similar things in the US, even though it is sort of, technically a tighter environment here. I think that's a lot of the value of people that get from starting a Bitcoin company over there.
Well, we were having this conversation last night, Jason, about how, because we were talking about this, how at the same time, Bitcoin will be adopted other places faster, but to this point, that hasn't really been the case. And, and I think my argument is that we have the luxury here. A lot of, people who are at this conference have the luxury of being able to travel to these things, being able to spend the time doing these speculative things and really proving out the models that actually work so that the people who don't have that luxury can then just take the stuff that works and adapt it to their situation exactly and just, hit the ground running.
On the subject of, this is backtracking the conversation a little bit, but you were talking about how we need to have Bitcoin businesses that don't have Bitcoin in the name. You'd asked about, is this the right time for our project? I feel like we have to do this project now, and Becky and I are trying to reach out to an audience that is beyond the Bitcoin community. I want this documentary film project to appeal to the Bitcoin community, but if Bitcoin is going to find wider adoption, if it's going to really develop as a usable currency, I feel like it has to be something that people outside of the technical or the libertarian communities find and see and understand the value of.
Didn't you see some statistic that Bitcoin was the highest searched, or Utahns searched for Bitcoin the most on Google?
Yeah, more than any other state in the union. Apparently, Utah has the highest search volume for Bitcoin on Google,
which is cool. So I think we're getting there. We're getting people to see it and ask about it.
Because it's not about Bitcoin. It's about reaching unbanked communities. It's about stopping, monetary inflation and allowing people to invest and have real savings and incentivizing investment. It's about getting around the regulatory state. It's about these other things. Bitcoin is a tool, so it needs to be thought of and branded in that way, not as a thing itself, but all the problems it solves.
Yeah, I like that. Bitcoin is a means like that.
Yeah. I have a really amateur question. Is there any role of banks in a Bitcoin economy?
Yeah, I think that arguably there is. I think that the traditional role that banks served as the actual guards and protectors of wealth, I think that there's definitely still a place for that. Because ultimately, not everybody wants the responsibility of having to manage all of their wealth and having to make sure that it's protected and kept safe. I think that the interesting part about Bitcoin is that you don't need the banks to do that. Yeah. But you can use them if they want to do that. Now, the things that banks can't do is they can't do a lot of the fractional reserve lending. You can do fractional reserve lending. It's not to say that it's impossible with Bitcoin, but it is to say that it's really, really risky in Bitcoin because the counterparty risk is something that doesn't go away no matter what you do. Ultimately, if you can't, enter something on a computer and create more Bitcoins like you can with the conventional banking system, or, dollars with the conventional banking system, then it's very, very difficult to do these sort of fractional reserves.
So just on the fractional reserve topic, because, fractional reserve was brought up at the conference and didn't get to really talk about as much. So, but doing fractional reserve banking like it's done with the US dollar, I think is going to be very difficult with Bitcoin. But we also do fractional reserve of precious metals here, which is which is a commodity fractional reserve, I think actually might be worse. So like, for instance, like if I buy a contract for like 10,000 ounces from a commodities broker, in 3 months when that contract comes due, they actually expect me to just like roll that over or take my profit. But I can actually go, no, I would like to take possession of my town, I would like to take delivery of those 10,000 ounces. Well, if you do that, Brinks or whoever's got like physical access, that's going to freak out. And it's actually like, I have a story from Roberts and Roberts, their awesome precious metal exchange in Pensacola, where a client did that. And it actually took them about 3 months after the contract to take possession of it. And when they talked to the bank, they're like, well, we had to clear all of those bars off of other commodities contracts that we had sold, which means that they had cross-collateralized the same bar. So you could do that with Bitcoin, like, oh no, we have possession of this Bitcoin, and you could just show someone on Bitcoin a wallet, if you were to do it the same way that we do precious metals, and then even the serial number on that piece of silver is unique, you could write the same serial number on different commodities contracts. As long as the people holding those contracts didn't know that it was cross-collateralized, you could have that fractional reserve. So I think what will happen, and what will make it more difficult, is that I think that we need to be more vigilant about building a system where that kind of stuff won't happen, where we can say we have some sort of system that's like, no, that's already on a contract, you can't do that. Because it's hard to do with a physical piece of silver. It's not hard to do with a Bitcoin. Well,
I think it's that hard to do thing. That's like the most important part there, is that with precious metals, there is a meaningful cost associated with taking that delivery, with not just rolling it over, because then it's just profit. You make whatever profit you're going to make. Yeah. It's easy, it's clean, you roll it into more, you level it up. But if you take delivery, then that's a lot of physical goods you have to take possession of. It has to be delivered, it has to be stored, it has to be
and they count on that. They count
right,
on that.
exactly.
So yeah,
that's how it works. But
it's very similar to the argument we were just making about how a credit card was not designed for the internet, but we use it like it is anyway. Like as Bitcoiners, we have to. We can't just make the Bitcoin system about like be the Bitcoin version of the systems we already have. We have to leverage the ability that Bitcoin has in a brand new way. It would be very easy to just do the exact same thing as we do with precious metals right now with Bitcoin, but we don't want to do that. We want to do something completely different.
But it's actually, I hear what you're saying. Okay, so what's the hardest thing about Bitcoin right now? Converting into and out of other currencies that are not cryptocurrencies, right? So given that that's the hardest and most expensive part of the entire Bitcoin ecosystem, all of the incentives say that if you do something like, buy a forward contract or sell a forward contract, you should expect that they're going to want delivery of Bitcoin, because simply put, it's the most efficient, cheapest, and fastest way.
I agree, but I think the part that you're missing right there is that like we're all extremely technologically adept when it comes to Bitcoin. Everyone in this room gets it, okay? But if you just have some institutional money or you just have some investment money, you're just going to call your commodity broker and say, hey, I want to get involved in this Bitcoin thing. And so I think that right now there is the potential for that to be abused, whereas a legacy person who was like a legacy commodities broker could transact Bitcoin like that. And then people that aren't aware that Bitcoin is as easy for a person to take aware of could be abused like that. Sure. I feel like we will probably see cases of that shortly.
I think it's plausible. So just some final wrap-up questions. First off, is anybody here involved in mining, or have you ever been involved in mining?
As of yesterday, yes. We just got that Jupiter.
You got a Jupiter?
Yeah, we got a Jupiter. Alex from KNC Miner flew one here for the conference. We set it up at the front and ran it a little bit yesterday, and it's been running in the hotel room all through the night.
So at the Bitcoin meetup prior to it, I was having a conversation with someone about the theory of mining Litecoins. And I was like, but I've never actually mined. And the guy literally walked out to his car, walked back in, and put a Radeon 7950 Sapphire in my hands. It was like, now you're a miner.
We've only been running it yesterday, but last night I couldn't stop staring at it, just staring at this machine that was running, driving the Bitcoin economy, and somehow magically, mysteriously making us a profit in the process.
So did you plan to buy this, or did you see it when it was here and you're like, We should probably get.
We planned on it.
Okay.
We were planning on getting one, but KNC, they're a sponsor of the project, and they wanted to make sure we got one quickly. And so they said, we'll bring you one out there. And we said, don't worry about that. They did it anyway. So I certainly am quite happy with what you would call customer service there, at least for the KNC miner. And I imagine it's probably this way for a lot of the ASIC miners that people are buying. The reason I didn't get into mining 2 years ago when I first started learning about it is because it was beyond my technical capacity. And the KNC miner last night, we pulled it out of the box, we plugged things in where they fit, and we saw some lights and fans turn on, and suddenly it's going. It was not a technically difficult operation.
Well, that's awesome, because to this point it really has been. That's why I've stayed out of mining, is because I don't have the time to learn all that stuff. Last question. Actually, I want to start with you again, Austin, because I think you might have a different perspective. Does the price of Bitcoin matter right now?
Yes, the price of Bitcoin matters. I feel like the way Bitcoin was designed, and I don't know if this was intentional, I kind of have to assume that maybe it was, is Bitcoin is rising in value rapidly early on. And that makes a difference, because then people like speculators will look at it and say, hey, there's a great opportunity there. I'm going to get involved. I'm going to buy into this cryptocurrency that otherwise is such a niche thing that if it wasn't rising in value, why would they get on board? Why is my father-in-law, who's retired and in his 70s, interested in Bitcoin? He otherwise would have no interest. He heard about it from us, but if it wasn't rising in value, it never would have caught his ear. Because it's rising in value, it's something that he said, hey, maybe I should make that part of my, high-risk portfolio for my retirement investments. We chatted about it. He decided not to, but he really was considering it. That rise in value is something that makes a great deal in, I hate to say it, the marketing of Bitcoin. It spreads word fast. The reason the mainstream media is picking up on this is because it's an investment opportunity. And then later on, obviously, that's going to taper off, but I feel like this was designed so that it would drive adoption quickly early on. And then it could be a usable currency later when value stops rising so rapidly.
I think it's important for what it says about other countries and other currencies. So I think what happened with Bitcoin in Cyprus was Bitcoin revealed what was going on. And so everyone paid attention to the money grab in Cyprus because it caused a Bitcoin boom. And so the rise and fall of Bitcoin shines a spotlight on the deficiencies of our current system.
I would definitely say that the price of Bitcoin does matter, and there are stronger ways coming out, such as BitShares, to determine and weigh out the price of Bitcoin.
The price of Bitcoin matters to me because unlike most people in the space, I have to sell Bitcoin all the time because people have to eat regardless. So I'm very sensitive to what the price is because I've had those days where we took a dip and I had to buy food anyway. So I've sold at 70 when it had just been over 100 and so I definitely feel the price point. But I think ultimately the price doesn't matter.
Well, as an economist, I would maybe counterintuitively say that it doesn't matter. Depends on the context, but for economists, a lot of arguments they've heard that needs to be like this, it shouldn't be volatile, it should be deflationary. It doesn't matter.
Thanks.
I think volatility, something like BitPay manages the volatility very, very well from a margin standpoint. So I think that we can get a lot of utility out of it regardless of the price point.
And I think that the Cyprus solution, this is not with regards to the financial crisis that was having that occurred there and is still kind of ongoing, but actually to the solutions that Michael Hill and Danny Brewster have come up with their Neo and B kind of paired projects that are both a Bitcoin bank that's going to have physical locations and a payment network that will utilize very, very modern debit card style things for very low transactions. I think that their model mostly is to denominate accounts in the local currency, and so they completely take the risk off of their users, and that's a bad thing, but it's also a good thing. So I think that and that's something that we've done with Let's Talk Bitcoin. The way that we're doing our e-commerce is we're letting people put money into our system at whatever time they want, and they can spend it immediately, or they can just let it sit there at the fixed value while we've taken on the exchange risk. So I think that there's a lot that the volatility is going to find the people who actually want the volatility. and that the people who don't want the volatility will be able to hand it off, and it won't actually cost them anything. They won't stand to gain from it, but they also won't stand to lose from it. That's a very interesting situation that I don't think we've really had before.
Oh, it's a market. Imagine.
The BitShares, the options and short and long, does just that. It separates the volatility between those who want to speculate and take the risk and those who want a cryptocurrency that's pegged to the dollar without any risk. That's
Daniel Larimer of Invictus Innovations, who just walked in at the last minute here. So that actually wraps up our roundtable. Once again, I'd like to really thank everybody for joining us today. This was a fun conversation, and I look forward to doing it again next year when we come back for the conference. Once again, thanks for listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin. We'll see you next time.
The easiest roundtable I was ever on.
Hi, this is Jason King, founder at Sean's Outpost, and you are listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin. Sean's Outpost is a homeless outreach in Pensacola, Florida, and we are proudly powered by Bitcoin. To date, over 13,000 meals have been fed to the homeless in our area, all purchased with Bitcoin and through the generosity of the cryptocurrency community. Read more about us at seansoutpost.com. Food, shelter, Bitcoin, everybody. Sean'sOutpost.com.